Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to our Committee of the Whole meeting. In regards to our budget deliberations, I'd like to call the meeting back to order after a short recess that we had. And we are back. So I would go back to our administration to proceed with the budget deliberations and consultations. Mr. Olansky, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Welcome back to Council, administration, members of the public. I'll have Ms. Chan pull up, share her screen again with, and while that's coming up, just wanted to share a little bit of our approach this evening. We're going to walk through a bit of a presentation with these items. We will then also come back to certain things within that presentation or refer back to, but our approach this evening is kind of to walk through, again, what we heard, what were some of the options or things that we may want to have further discussion on. You'll see around the revenue options around Boundary Road, and looking for some finalized or consensus on some direction from committee, and then just kind of look ahead as to next steps. So that's sort of what will be our approach this evening. So again, we will have lots of opportunity for council to ask questions on specific aspects of the presentation, but we'll kind of walk through that first and come back where we need to. So next slide, please. So on the what we heard, we felt that we did hear a general support for the current approach in the corporate plan and budget. Certainly we did hear a few things where, tweaks in future iterations and future deliberations, and we've made note of those things, and certainly will continue to evolve and grow and incorporate those things. But for the most part, for this iteration and this approach, that we felt we heard that there was a support for our current approach to what we presented. We did also hear, though, for this iteration, as we go out to the public in terms of the actual finalized plan, that there'd be a little bit more inclusion of a little bit more detail in the business cases. So it provides a little bit more line of sight for the public as well. And again, when we talk about grants to other organizations, so we'll make sure that we have something that goes in a table showing that in the 2021 corporate plan. Just a caveat on that again, and we say 2021. Council, we've talked about it in the past, but we will be looking in 2021 to developing a more robust, public submission process, and potentially looking at even a granting program and policy around that. So that might shift how we look at grants. And again, we'll include that table in the corporate plan. So that's some of the things that we did here. Next slide. My copy fell off here. Sorry. Okay, so some of the other things in terms of amendments, we heard on the first day in regards to council remuneration that council was directing to have their salaries remain at the 2019 rate. We also heard that in one of the business cases, the specific aspect of the high load corridor in the competitiveness and investment attraction, that would maybe be something council would like to bring forward, and we'll again talk about that later to confirm that direction. We did look at pulling that out, and it would just be 15,000 just for that portion, and could be funded through some remaining most funding. So again, we'll have some discussion later to confirm that, but we heard that would maybe be something council would like for us to get the number on, which we have done, and potentially look at that as well. I think it's an important one because it's a big project, and we talked about it in quite a lot of detail yesterday. It presented more information to council, but that in the city center ARP business case, what we've heard and can confirm that we will proceed as planned for 2021, and then for some of the out years, that the shift to complete the rest of that we would focus on completing the city center, and the trade-off a little bit is shifting some of the neighborhood renewal funding to later years to support the completion of the ARP, as council felt that was a significant priority for them. Next slide, please. Okay, on the revenue options, again, based on the discussions of the last 2 days, we heard support for, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail on this. But we did hear general support for a 5-year dedicated tax stream for life cycling. We originally proposed 1%, we heard 1.5, and we're going to show you in more detail a little bit of those, and we'll have further discussions on that. But the general concept, we heard some support for. We also heard support for the property tax split shift. We're going to show you some of them. We talked about maybe doing half in the first year or different things. So we will show you what a couple options around that for you to have further discussion on. But general support for needing it, and just talk about the timing and maybe some different options. So we'll go through that with you. But we also heard clearly that the franchise fee not supported at this time. May be something that we consider in future years, but certainly not for 2021. So that's something that council, we felt, confirmed to us. Next slide. So here's where we start getting into some of the options and what that looks like, and remind you, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Frostad at this point to walk you through some of these options around these revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Walensky. As council will remember, we are working towards life cycling stream of revenues to fund life cycle work for our infrastructure. So the amount that is required eventually is 5.755 million annually. And in order to achieve that, we had suggested a few options. So the dedicated tax stream for life cycling, the 1% increase that we showed you last night, by year 5 would yield 2.09 million per year. And it was going to cost the ratepayers $1.90 per month, or $22.80 annually, and it would yield $410,000 in the first year. So next slide, please. An alternative that was mentioned last night, and we thought we would show you the difference, is a 1.5 increase for the first 5 years. And this would yield 3.14 million per year by the end of year 5. And the year 1 cost to ratepayers would be $2.85 per month, or $34.20 annually, and would yield $612,000 in new revenue in year 1. Next slide. The other options we discussed was an advancement of our split between residential and non-residential ratepayers. We had suggested to you a 0.05 shift. This option is considering the 0.025 shift. So half of what we had suggested in year 1, and then the balance of the shifts in the following 6 years to still reach the average. So this option would yield new revenue of $226,000 in the first year, and then $451,000 per year afterward. Each of these options will still produce the 2.9 million annual contribution at the close of 7 years. This option would cost ratepayers $17 per 100,000 of assessment in year 1, and approximately $35 per 100,000 in the final 6 years. So you remember last night that the option of 0.05 was going to cost $33 per year. The second option we are bringing on this, on the following slide, is a 0% shift, or a 0-point shift in year 1, and then the balance of the shifts in the final 6 years to bring you up to the 1.73. So that would yield 0 new revenue in year 1, and then approximately $483,000 per year after that for 6 years. Again, this will still, by the end of 7 years, take you to $2.9 million contribution to life cycle. And it will cost the ratepayers $0 per 100,000 in year 1, and $38 per 100,000 in the following 6 years. Next slide.
Thanks, Ms. Frostad. I'll kind of start this one off, and I'm going to use Mr. Lubser throughout this. But and again, what we just presented, again, we'll come back to and we'll go through each of those things for council input and discussion. On Boundary Road overall, what we heard was, there was a concern potentially with moving this forward. But we did also hear that you at least maybe wanted to see what some of the cost estimates would be for the full, but then also maybe partial just up to. And again, Mr. Levasseur will talk a little bit about that in a minute. I did want to just confirm, information with my counterpart in Stony Plain. Council may be aware, but they did pass a motion last night which directed administration to include in 2021 a potential partnership project with the city of Spruce Grove for the engineering design of Boundary Road North, with funding to be determined and recommended as part of their corporate plan for November 23rd. So the idea would be that we would work with them, get the information, estimated costs prior to November 23rd, and they would potentially look at including that in 2021. So I did want to just indicate that has taken place. But again, we would still, I think based on some of the discussion, not necessarily recommend for some of the reasons that we and council discussed last night, but also that Mr. Levasseur will expand upon. But certainly we did hear that council wanted to see some of that information as requested. And so I'll turn it over to Mr. Levasseur now to walk through that information with you.
Thank you, Mr. Wolanski. Next slide, please. So when reviewing the options that are available, we had a look at a various number of options, and so I'll work through the options presented on the slide here, and it may generate some questions, but I'll attempt to answer those kind of through my presentation. The first option obviously would be to continue to follow our fiscal principle of developer pays for development, meaning that the current Boundary Road expansion or construction was estimated at 2031, but that we would advance that with high growth and work with the development community as they develop to complete the Boundary Road construction. That would also buy some additional time to work with Stony Plain on potential options as well. The second option was to look at, again, the full scope of what the extension of Grove Drive into Boundary Road to 16A would look like. And that was the section that was contemplated within the long-term view of option one. And so the approximate engineering design costs were anticipated to be in and around $400,000 with a construction value of $11 million based on 2018 estimates. So again, I believe that the 18 estimates were the ones that were used for the offsite levy model calculation that I brought up yesterday. The third option, we looked at three different sub options, if you will. So this is the option that really looks at what's within the jurisdiction of Spruce Grove. And so it was mentioned by council last night that we could look at an extension from Upper Haven School roundabout to where the Grove Drive currently ends and extend that up into the point that it joins with Boundary Road. And so when we looked at these options earlier today, we looked at an urban build out, which would be similar to what we would contemplate should we build out, as an example, in option two, should we build out the full meal deal with urban cross section, curbs, gutters, etc. The construction value of that would be approximately $4.1 million. And then the engineering was anticipated at $400,000. And so this cost actually remains the same as option two, in that it was strongly recommended that if detailed engineering design was contemplated, that it be designed fully to the connection of 16A and then built out in phases. And so there's a lot of continuity built into that. Again, more discussions with our neighbors would have to occur. But that's the option two accommodate within Spruce Grove boundaries. And again, the urban build out would include the roundabouts, etc., that we would normally do within our functional plans and our current standards that we've been using as a city. Option 3B looked at a basic 2-lane paved structure. So there would be just a basic structure in place. There would likely be some street lighting put in, a little bit of drainage, ability to handle drainage, but it'd be constructed just basically to have a paved surface up until the point that it matches with the current Boundary Road gravel road. And then when we looked at that costing, we anticipated a construction cost of just over $1.6 million, with approximate engineering at $180,000. Option 3C was to actually look at a gravel 2-lane structure from the existing ending of Grove Drive. And that would be a very simple structure, gravel structure, as opposed to a paved structure. Construction was estimated at just over $1 million, engineering around $120,000 to have that completed. So when we were analyzing these last 3 options, and again, option C, 3C, would include some lighting and drainage to go along with that. So the basic difference between B and C is just pavement. When we were looking at these options, we were also looking at the funding mechanisms that would be in place, or funding options that would be available. And so if you're looking at option 2, that could be funded through the developer fund offsite levies, but it would have to be funded through debt, so the developer portion of debt. When we analyzed 3A, which was an urban build out, it's building to that same standard, just a little less road, we felt as well that there was a funding source through debt through the developer portion, as it would fit in the arterial offsite levies portion. When we looked at B and C, 3B and 3C, we felt that efforts would be made to minimize the throwaway costs. However, we do feel that there would be a significant amount of throwaway cost should the construction occur with the options 3B and 3C. So keeping that in mind, we feel that it doesn't meet the criteria to fund from the developer offsite levies. And so it would have to be funded through debt, but the municipal portion of debt. And so that's kind of the reasoning behind some of the thoughts around the 3A, B, C. But we did want to provide some varying options to council so that they might have a more fulsome picture. And so those are the 3 options. Again, is to keep similar to what was presented yesterday. 2031 could be sooner depending on the growth and the needs of the developer. Option 2, design just and build just the portion within Spruce Grove limits, or pardon me, the full meal to 16A. And then number 3 is various options within Spruce Grove city limits.
Thank you. We go to the next slide. Just before I turn this to Ms. Frossa to provide a little more detail, just wanted to provide this again for council. I know there was a couple of questions on what does some of our discussions, what the impact it has on our debt. So we're providing this just for that context. Currently, based on the discussions we've had over the last couple of days, it doesn't change that. Of course, if further to what we might talk about with Boundary Road or something, it might, but that's why it's here today, just to show you. But Ms. Frossa will also just provide a little bit more context and reminder on this again for you.
Thank you. So just as a reminder, the only debt included in the 2021 corporate plan is related to the utility in the amount of 2.4 million, bringing our total projected debt to 41 million at the close of 21. Our self-imposed debt limit is 65 million based on 50% of the provincial limit. We do have further debt proposed in 22 and 23 for the Arena Complex project. And within the current plan, the city is projected to exceed its own self-imposed limit at 2025. We also wanted to remind council that this graph does split the debt between municipal, utility, and developer, with the largest portion of our debt currently being municipal debt, a small portion of utility, and the medium portion being developer debt. We also want to draw attention to the fact that the limits on debt are created by calculating a portion of our revenues. So as revenues potentially decline, so does your debt limit. And just wanted to draw that correlation for council's understanding as well.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is where we want to get back and have the discussion with council on some of those items that we mentioned that require a little bit further direction and to confirm from council. So, and we certainly can and will be prepared to go back to any of those slides which had some of the detail for council to go through this. Mr. Mayor, I don't know if you would like me to facilitate this or yourself in terms of some of the questions, but I guess we'd start with the high load corridor and council's feedback as to whether to include that or not.
Okay, just a quick question is, I had a question, is there any way we can get these slide decks emailed to us? They want to, so some council can refer to those with their other laptop. They're just asking for these decks, slide decks that are being sent to us.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll get that done as soon as we can. Yeah, it was just finalized, I know, only just a little bit before our meeting, but yes, so we'll endeavor to get that. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Wolanski, you're facilitating the conversation in regards to direction from committee, and so are you going to open up? Are you going to open up on number one about the high load corridor, or is that the first discussion point?
Sure. Yeah. Why don't we we'll open that up to number one. Maybe we'll take off screen sharing and then we'll come back on screen sharing for the next one. So this way we see everyone's. So yeah, we'll looking for input and direction for council on including that for 15,000 and using some most funding for that because it'll be a one-time project.
Yeah. Councillor Acker, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd be very supportive of looking at that sustainability funding to do the study at least. I think it's important for us for economic development. We're doing the fiber in that area. I think we need to see where the transportation corridors are. So I'm supportive of looking at using that funding envelope that we received to pursue on that study.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Acker. I think it really got our attention when Councillor Acker and I had we had the tour of Rosen Steelworks, and we went there, and they asked us to help them. They want to construct this stuff in Spruce Grove. They don't feel they're fabricating the steel in Spruce Grove, and then they're shipping it to Nisku for assembly, and then shipping it. So they'd like to have that in here. I think one of the other things Mr. Walker had talked about previously as well was creating a conversation with Melcor Developments for the back half of their development there, and that we could have an advantage, for both. And so I do know that Rosen Steelworks even talked about a cost share on the work that needed to be done, and that would be between the city, the development community, potentially another developer, and Rosen, as well as Fortis. So it's a matter of running some big power underground on the south part of the highway. But yeah, I'm supportive of it as well. And for $15,000, we can't miss, I think, on that one to look at. Go ahead, Councillor Oldham.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd also lend my support to it. And I understand that the money comes from different pools, but the numbers must be close with council keeping our salary at 2019 levels. the cost savings would probably offset the funding that we would put forward for this. So I understand that the most grant, it needs to be used for specific things, and obviously council budget is different, but at the end of the day, it's one taxpayer and one big budget, and I think that might be something to offset. I think we've tried to not add a lot to the corporate plan this year, knowing how tight it is, and so I think it's almost a nice work that it might offset. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I'm going to go to Councillor Roth. Councillor
Thank you,
Grilke, did you have your hand up?
I'm going to support it as well. I think we all ran on a platform of economic development, and we all support economic development. And it's not, I was going to use the word necessary. It's probably not necessary, but I think it's a very prudent expenditure, and I think it's something that we should do. And it's not a great deal of money, so I'll throw my support behind it as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councillor McKenzie.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too would throw my support towards this. I think that this is a very crucial study to help continue to grow our community and especially our industrial commercial.
Okay, thank you. I see Councillor Grilke nodding her head, and I see Councillor Stevenson nodding her head and going like this. So I think that's kind of that's a good one on that one. Mr. Wolanski, thank you very much.
Hey, no, thank you, Council. So the next one would be the dedicated tax stream for life cycle funding. I believe Council has the presentation now. It's been sent. Is that correct? Do you have it? I see people checking. We can pull it up, but in the meantime, while you're doing that, but we'll be looking at we'll start at slide 6 and 7 is where we kind of talked about the two options around the 1% and the 1.5.
Councillor Acker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just got a question. And when I was looking at these numbers yesterday and then again today, are you able to tell me what the accumulating tax amount is over the 5 years? So I know it's 22 first year, and then I guess it'd be 44 plus a little bit different.
So Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Acker, for the 1% option, it would be 2.09 million. And for the 1.5, it would be 3.14 million.
No, I got that. I was thinking more impact to residents. I know we talk about the annual 1% as $1.90 a month, $22.80 a year. And we're having a program that lasts 5 years, and we'll increment this 1% every year to get to large enough funding to hopefully support our life cycle. But what would the accumulated amount of tax increase for the program be over the 5 years? So it starts at 22, and by the end, it's over 100, I would imagine.
2280 annually. Yes, you could multiply by 5 and then it'd be just slightly higher than that because there's a compounding effect to each year. So it'd be about, maybe 5.2 times the numbers I gave you. So 2280 for the first one and 3420 for the second one.
Okay. Perfect. No, I just think it's important to know impacts of a program. I'm still supportive of the program. I'm more comfortable, I think, with the 1% than the 1.5%. I appreciate Councillor Stevenson's message yesterday, last evening's, that we shouldn't be spoiling our residents and having them be comfortable of minimal tax increases. But I think my comfort level on starting it, especially in this year, would still be at the 1% point.
Councillor Grilke has her hand up.
Councillor Grilke, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question regarding if we chose to do the 1.5 in year 1, hypothetically, there's nothing saying that we can't modify it to 1% at year 2 and 3, or would this be brought back every year? I think you might have said that yesterday. Or if we pick 1%, it's 1% for the 5 years and we just kind of set it and forget it.
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Grilke, tax rate setting has to happen annually. So it
Understand.
would have to come back in each budget cycle, but it would be expressed within a corporate plan each year that it had been council's intent to do a 5-year view. But you're correct that you could start at 1% and change it to another one later on.
Because I think about not necessarily this year, as we've tried to be very lean and we're not adding things to the corporate plan, but going forward, we need to maybe put ourselves in future councils' shoes, say in 2022 or 2023, where we may want to set something in. It might be prudent in year one to do 1.5 and set a little bit bigger benchmark so that we have some flexibility in 22 and 23. If something comes on board that we need to take a look at, we can potentially reduce that to the 1%. Just kind of thinking future years, because I feel like we maybe missed an opportunity in 2020 to do a slight increase, as opposed to definitely come down from the 3.9 that we had projected, because my fear is that as council had expressed yesterday, that we might have left ourselves too lean this year. So I just don't want to do that again in future years so that we're scrambling. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank
Mr.
you,
Mayor,
Councillor Grocke.
sorry, Mr. Mayor, if I could just add to Councillor Grocke's question, I guess the best example of that, and to add on to what Ms. Frostad said, would be the franchise fees actually. If council recalls, we had planned in previous years and talked about and made sort of decisions around, we would incorporate that in future and get towards that over the last steps, but council made a decision to alter that. So this could be similar. You could alter it down, you could alter it up, you could have some further discussions, but the intent would be.
Well, and I think it's simpler to alter it down. I would challenge that if we started at 1, it would be more difficult to go to 1.5 or 2 in future years, because again, things are going to come on stream that we may not have considered at this point. So I would be comfortable at 1.5 for 2021. And then of course, looking as we go out, if we need to adjust it down or stay the same.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Grocke.
I'm going to actually suggest if we could take maybe screen sharing off, and we can always pull these up, or council can refer to, just so we can see people's hands and whatnot.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor McKenzie, did you have your hand up, or were you just touching? Yeah, okay, go ahead, Councillor McKenzie.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too, I'm struggling with this one. Last night during our deliberations, I really like the idea of the 1%. I think people are hurting. But after listening to a few people, and especially Councillor Grocke's comment, and I do agree, it's easier to go down than it is to go up in the future for future councils and such. And, you know, you're right, we were at a 3.9 originally, we've gone down to a 0. So potentially maybe the 1.5 for this, I think I could get my head around it and support it. So I know this is the next step, but I just feel that if we're actually increasing to the residents, I struggle then with lowering the business one of what was recommended, but we can discuss that in moving forward. But I really feel that if we're willing to increase the residential one, I think, our residents are hurting just as much as our businesses. So anyways, that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Mrs. Frostad?
I just need to bring a little clarification. This tax increase would be for all ratepayers, not just residential.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councillor Roth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to indicate my support for the 1%. I get the point of view that it's easier to reduce something than add something, but we add something every year. So normally we have tax increases, and so I don't think it's a significant issue if we have to go to 1%, which I think we should do this year. Of course, council will rule, and I'll support whatever council decides to do. But I just think, given the times and the economic struggles by our residential and business ratepayers, that 1% would be the way I would prefer to go in 2021. Thank you.
Councillor Grilke?
Just a question, sorry, did we have any growth this year? I don't remember if we talked about that or if I remember seeing a number. With our 0%, did we do an adjustment for growth, or did we in fact retract in our population? I'm not sure.
There was, Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Golke, I assume you're speaking of 2020, correct? There was growth in 2020, but it matched the amount of growth that we had built into that budget year. So we had 1.71% in growth revenues, and we are projecting 1.25 for 2021. So that's already built into the budget and will be reconciled at spring adjustment.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor McKenzie?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I guess just because Ms. Frost had made a comment at the end of my thing, and I obviously last night was completely not thinking about it, and I was thinking that it was just the residential on this component. And I think, you know, just going back to the, oh shoot, I'm receiving the call that I needed to take. Anyways, going back to looking at what we had, shoot, sorry, I'm a little flustered here.
Chantel, just go take your call.
No, that's okay. I've answered. It's fine. Anyways, what my question is, I know we talked about the second thing, and it was $33,000 per 100,000, or $33 per 100,000 with the when we look at the business one, the tax split, but we only talked about the how much this would cost for the average house owner. So I'm just wondering what that amount would be then for the for the businesses too, based on 100,000. Sorry,
And we can calculate that for you. I don't have that right now, but I can get that calculated for you.
Okay, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Councillor Stevenson?
Great, thanks. So through you, Mr. Mayor, I think this was along the lines of what maybe Councillor Acker was asking, but I'm not sure. So if we weren't to if we, let's say we didn't change the split we have between businesses and residents, I understand the 1% would be $22 and change every year. But if we change the split over that 5 years, would residents not see a decrease in the amount that 1% dedicated tax would be towards this, and that the businesses would actually pay the difference essentially? So it's not necessarily $100 over the 5 years. It could actually be less because the businesses are making it up in that split.
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Stevenson, you are correct. The way we present these is standalone options. So we haven't presented for you the interaction of the options at this point. Once a corporate plan is formulated and council has made decisions that impact one another, we would then in the final plan be able to say, you know, what the net effect was. But right now, each of these options is a singular option that you could consider. And so you need to know the effect of that particular option.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. My second question is we always talk about percentages. Do we ever, or is it even possible to do a flat rate? So the percentage would change, but we would say every resident every household would be charged $22 a year and every business would be charged this. Can you do it that way, or is it always a percentage?
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Stevenson, I believe that taxation in this province must operate off of assessment. So you cannot charge a flat rate to every household because every household is assessed differently. You are possibly talking about a levy of some kind or a user fee versus a tax. A tax is always based on your assessment.
Okay, that makes sense. So is it possible then so let's say we do consider the split rate. So we're shifting it, but we want to keep the amount approximately $22 per household over 5 years. So we would see maybe 1 and then maybe 1.15. We could do something like that. So overall, we know at the end of 5 years, we want to be able to gather this much money, and then we would just determine on a year by year basis what that percentage would look like. So it's not necessarily a 1% dedicated, it would be a 1 and a slight variation up to the 5 years because of the shift happening with the split rate with residents and businesses. I imagine that would be possible.
So, Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Stevenson, yes, what is possible in that way is that council could set a fixed revenue requirement. So if you wanted to say, we want to transfer 450,000 per year, or 450 the first year, 900 the second year, or whatever, you could set that fixed revenue requirement, and then it's subject to growth, it's subject to assessment changes, and it's the same as any other revenue requirement that you build into your budget in that case. But it's a little harder to track it as a dedicated tax increase at that point. It's more, you've made a revenue requirement decision that affects your overall taxes.
Okay. I think that's in my head. That's what I was thinking. So I'm really glad that there's a term for it. It's just good to know some of these options, understanding how all these decisions affect one another and what the options are. If we are looking to get to a certain point at the 5 years so that we don't fall short or end up collecting too much. So thank you. Those answer my questions.
Councillor Oldham, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. And through you, I get a sense we're working our way towards a decision here on the dedicated life cycling. And I think, though, as has been mentioned many times, this fits within the bigger picture of what we end up doing with that split rate as well. So I'm hesitant to kind of go one way or the other at this point before I get a sense of what we're going to want to do with that split rate. Historically, in my mind, historically being 3 years, we've looked at the tax increase as just a grouping of residential and business. And then we've looked at the needs of what the city is going to have for revenue to run the city for the year. And this year, I think more than any, the sense I get and the sense that I have is that there's that real focus on wanting to make sure that we recognize the challenges that everyone is undergoing, including businesses. And we're differentiating now a little bit for the first time with this business split rate. So what we do with that, to me, because the dedicated life cycling affects everybody and the business split will only affect the businesses. If we go, I'm okay with 1.5 here, but then I think we need to be a little gentler on the businesses with the business split rate, whether that's 0.025 or 0 for the first year. So I just want to be mindful of that as I make a comment, and I know people are tracking these comments and thoughts as it should be, but wanting to understand that big picture on how we're going to impact businesses this year and residents, of course. But because we're differentiating for the first time ever in my time here, the business rate, I want to be mindful of that as well.
And Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Oldham, that's a great comment and great question. We certainly, this is still at the feedback and discussion point. And so as we get to those other things, certainly we can come back and just, again, one more time, our goal is we have a slide at the end that we haven't shared with you yet, is this is, again, what we're here, this is what we're going to take forward. So we can certainly come back once we talk about some of those other things.
Okay. I guess I have a question, Mr. Wolanski, and one of the questions that I posed to administration is coming back to us to say, what do we need? What do we need as a city? I mean, if we say today, I think Councillor Oldham makes a good point, because if we go by 0.025 for the businesses this year, that generates 220 odd thousand that goes into our general revenue pool. You know, it's generated from business, and we generate those dollars into our pool. I don't know if I have that's the exact number, but I would think it was around 229,000 or something. The other part, the 1 or the 1.5%, however council lands on, would be going strictly into a protected reserve fund. So I guess from an administrative point of view, I guess the only thing that I worry about is, you know, we're only collecting 229,000 isn't a small amount of money, but because, you know, we can support, you know, a smaller portion of that, but, you know, I think you would say, yes, we need some revenue. But what's your thoughts, Mr. Wolanski, just in regards to the question that I had asked? You know, when you're making these presentations, you've provided some options for us. And one of them, which I actually like, is saying nothing on the business side this year, but then we would pick it up next year and make it maybe when we have a little bit more of a recovery. So, I mean, that is a good option for us to consider, because if we go to a very small amount, it still gets generated as if we are increasing a tax to a business during tough times. So what's your thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of things that you had indicated. So yes, we talked about the this 1%, 1.5%, this dedicated would go dedicated towards life cycle. But I should clarify too, because you talked about general fund, the tax split one would also only be dedicated for life cycle.
Oh,
so
okay.
That wouldn't go into the general fund. So now,
Okay.
further to your question on what we need, I think Ms. Frostad has kind of indicated it's the 5.7 million, and none of these options get us there fully. So, but we're trying to balance that between what we heard, and I think, you know, what you mentioned, even the 0.25 or the half of what we presented earlier, but then we also heard, well, wait a minute, maybe the accumulation of all of these things, and it might be, but we're saying, for us, it's to start. I can tell you that administratively, starting this program and having the concept and the principle and having council support that, we need to start this.
Okay.
How we get there and when we get there, that is key for us. The more we can get up front, obviously there's that cumulative effect. But I hope that answers what we need.
Yeah.
More than this, but we're recognizing the balance and the tricky part of where we're currently in.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that for me. And that makes my my thought process a little bit easier, because if the increase to the business split rate goes into life cycle as well, you know, I think I'd rather try to generate those revenues in one stream rather than saying, okay, we're going to do 1.5 plus we're going to do this to business. So I guess I would throw my support to the 1.5 and have 0 on the split mill rate this year, and then start it next year when we have a little bit more of a recovery. I mean, I'll just throw that out there from my perspective. I don't know if it'll get any traction from the rest of council, but that way we're not looking like we're going after businesses on 2 streams, right? Because the 1.5% will also tax business, right, as well.
Yes. So maybe, Mr. Mayor, I think, unless people want to comment on this thing, but again, we can come back to it. I think we've heard from everyone on the 1.5 and dedicated, but we'll come back to that once we talk about this next one. So why don't we jump back to, this council has the presentation now? Is that my understanding? Okay. So we'd be looking at slides 8 and 9 in that presentation. So we don't need to pull it up at this point, but certainly if you want to refer to slides 8 and 9, these were the 2 options. And again, Ms. Frostad can answer any kind of maybe more technical questions on these. But again, we had presented an option around the 0.5, and then we had heard about a half of that. I don't know if I keep messing.
So it's 0.05.
Thank you.
And 0.025.
Okay.
So we had heard that option thrown out yesterday. So we wanted to show you that and reflect that. In our discussions as administration today, we thought more, we also heard some comments around concerned about even that cumulative effect on businesses as well. And we heard words like recovery and maybe when that happens. So that's why we thought of still keeping the 7-year time frame, because we still think that's a longer period of time. We don't want to do this over 2 years. That would be too impactful. But we said we could still keep the 7, but maybe not do anything in year 1 and then kind of increase it over the remaining 6 years. So that wasn't necessarily discussed yesterday, but we wanted to throw that out. So I'll open it up to council to provide feedback on either of those, keeping in mind what we just talked about too on the 1 and 1.5.
Okay, I really liked when I saw that option, Mr. Wolanski, to say nothing this year, and then we would try to do it over a 6-year period, blend it in. And that way we may be in a little bit better position for recovery. And so that way that the message goes out that, we've done our best this year to support business and minimize the impact on creating this life cycle reserve. I recognize we need to create the life cycle reserve, but I think I would say that instead of saying, okay, we're going to do a 1 or a 1.5 plus, we're going to increase to business. I think even at a small amount would kind of convolute the fact that, maybe we haven't understood enough of business. So I like the option that you presented, Mr. Wolanski, and I don't think any of us thought of it, but I'm happy to see it come back to say we'll start it in nothing in this year, but look at it for next year at deliberation time, of course. But I'll open it up to anybody else who. Councillor Oldham.
I'll go first only if I get to change my mind. Just kidding. I would comment that I like that idea, Mayor. I like your idea of having, instead of 1 here and 1 there, as I've said before, death by 1,000 cuts, it'll be more clear. I think the revenue ends up probably being close to the same if it's 1% dedicated life cycle and then 0.025 or 1.5% and 0. I think the revenue works out relatively the same. So having 1 there, I'm still a believer that relative to other communities, our residents are paying more for the services than the businesses are relative to other communities, because there is no other standard to measure it by. Yeah. So I really would be a proponent of ensuring that we do stay with this property tax rate split as a concept. Obviously, there'll be different faces on this screen or in council chambers potentially next year. So my hesitation is that we don't get it going with this council who believes in it. But we're in a 1 in 100-year event with a global pandemic, and businesses have been really badly hit. So when I weigh all that out in my mind, it's a tough one for me. But I would be comfortable with your proposal of a 1.5 general dedicated life cycling, and then move that tax rate split over a 7-year period, but 0 in year 1. So moving it forward. But I'm really curious to hear what my council colleagues have to say on this, because it's not just a revenue question, it's a bit of a philosophical question as well. So I'll let other people speak.
We'll, as soon as somebody puts their hand up, we will. I think one thing I would also like to say, which I did like to see, I did enjoy seeing, and I agree with you, Councillor Oldham, that we need to balance that split between the residential and non-residential. And we're on the low side, and that's attractive for business investment too. Leduc is the lowest, and Stony Plain is second lowest, and Spruce Grove is third. That speaks to the for businesses locating to say, that's a pretty attractive rate for me to go. And I know that Edmonton's rate based on our rate is probably about 2 times that. So there's an opportunity there to do that. But I think, yes, I agree with you that we need to move those up. And I think the same would also reiterate your support for what I had suggested, because the 1.5, because I was actually, last night I was leaning toward a 1%, And then after I heard Councillor Stevenson, I started more going toward 1.5, but at the same token, I rationalized that the 1.5 would get us the same revenue as a 1% and a 0.25 on the other end. So I think you're right. The death by 1,000 cuts, this is clear cut. It's open and transparent. This is where that money is going. It's not going into general revenue. It's going into a fund, a reserve fund for the future of infrastructure in the community. So throw that out there for anybody else who would like to add. Councillor Acker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm trying to find a number that I believe was in our package, and it was talking about what the projected assessment is for the average single-family home in Spruce Grove for the next 3 years. And what I recall was it was a $20-some thousand dip and then kind of stagnant for the next 3 years. So I have a question for administration. Regardless of what number we come up with the tax increase, we're not talking tax increase. We're talking an average of, we need the revenue of 1% or 1.5% more revenue, and then dispersed amongst whatever the assessed value of our homes are. And the concern that we're going to hear is, while my assessment has dropped 20,000, 30, 40, 50,000 in 2021, well, it'll be this year for next year's taxes. So their tax bill is going to be a lot more than 1%. It's going to be, it's going to still have to, we still need to rein in the same amount of dollars, just spread out amongst the assessment in the area. But can you confirm if my numbers are right? Was it a drop that we're seeing and a stagnation for the next 3 years on assessment value?
I believe, Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Acker, are you referring to the graph that showed projected growth in our tax revenue from growth?
No, I actually saw it was about an average family assessment, single family home assessment. I thought I saw it in this package. I don't know if anyone else saw it.
We
Maybe
gave you a median assessment number for 2021, but I don't believe we had that for each year. But you're correct that the 1% or the 1.5% that we're talking about is a revenue requirement number. So yes, it translates into a different tax increase based on assessment. So if assessment grows, it can come back less, for example. And that's why we're going to come to you at spring adjustment and tell you what the effective growth was. And then council has a decision to make at that point what they actually do with the final revenue requirement before setting the tax rate.
Okay, my preference would be looking at remaining at 1%, but the half of the 0.025 on the business. My worry is if we defer it all, my mind will say if we're trying to still do it in the 7 years, it's going to be a bigger increase in 2022 for the businesses because we got to catch up now. If we slowly ease it in, it's also taking away some of that imbalance between non-residential and residential on the mill rates. And if it's the same financial pull that we're trying to secure within year one, I think setting that framework or setting that tone as this council, understanding we're all going into an election next year, it sets the program up that we're looking at changing mill rates and getting those up. We're looking at a tax increase sustained over a 5-year program. So it's giving good indications of what the fiscal policy and the strategy is, and then allowing future councils to hopefully carry through with this plan and understanding the value of it. But my preference would be a smaller increase year one. So the 0.025, I think Councillor Oldham's mentioned yesterday, rather than a 0, because I think we're just delaying the shock to the businesses when we start adjusting that in 2022. So a smaller increase there. I would still like to see 1% because I can justify that we're looking to building up our life cycle reserves that we need to do. And we know it's a tough economy out there. We know people are struggling, but we also as a city need to protect the assets that we all enjoy. So as I think we're all on the same page of trying to minimize that impact. And at a 1%, I can say, well, it's a plan. We're starting. We got a lot of work to do, but we're getting on that pathway. So those are my positions. Thank you.
Mr. Wolanski.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just through to the Council Acker and the rest of council, just to remind, because if you look at 8 and 9, and it's a good point. Yes, there is a bigger impact on the second year, basically if we went to 0, whatever. But so in the option 1, if we started at the 0.025, it's $35 per 100,000, and it's $38 in the second. So it's $3 per 100,000 is the difference by not doing anything in year one, just to remind.
Councillor McKenzie. Then Councillor Roth.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Wolanski, could you actually just repeat what you just said? It was $35.38, you said?
Yeah, why don't, if we could, you have it with you, but let's pull up, if we can have slides 8 and 9 shared, Ms. Chan. And then Ms. Frostad can maybe just clarify it even more than I might have done.
So Mr. Wolanski is talking about the impact in year 2. So in year 2, the difference in impact is $3 because under option 1, the 0 to 5, it would be $35 in year 2. But under the 0 option, it's $38 in year 2.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I'd misunderstood. I was thinking that was because yeah, the way that I look at it, and again, I'm struggling because I think we have to make this decision in unison and figure out, how we want to move forward this. And I know, sorry, I was a little flustered the last time when I spoke asking about it, but I was wondering, have you had a chance to calculate out? I think because last night's presentation on the one slide that we had, we showed A and then the rate change and the impact, and then B, the rate change. And we only talked about the impact to the resident on the A, and the B was to the property. So I just kind of was making an assumption, and yeah, I wasn't thinking. So I guess I just really want to know what the impact for the business is for the dedicated tax stream portion. Because I just struggle with making that decision on B if I don't know what A gives us. Like, is it a fairly quick calculation, or can we get that number?
Mr. Mayor, I don't have it yet, but we can. It's a little bit more complex than just the overall calculation, but we can work on getting that.
Yeah. And I think, even I get that it is an estimate, and it's, it all depends on the mill rates and everything like that determines, but it's still nice to see, when you're looking at the 1% does $22 annually for the average homeowner of the 360,000. But when we look at the property tax split one, we're looking at already $33 for 100,000. I don't personally, I don't think that that's a lot. On $1 million property, that's only $330 for the year, and approximately. So, but if we're already increasing it substantially on A for the businesses, then that makes me second guess B. And so I just would really like to see that number. The other question though that I have while you're working that out is, when we talk about spring budget adjustment, and spring budget adjustment is potentially done for the growth, and in the past we hadn't been correcting for that, so therefore we weren't truly collecting that extra overage for the growth. When we're setting a dedicated tax stream and it's a 1%, would we then adjust that at spring, or would that be consistent and it's just at the 1%, or would we be adjusting that based on growth as well? Or, because I know we talked about when we do the communication, it's a 0% tax increase with a dedicated, tax. And so I just am wondering how that works at spring about budget adjustment time.
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor McKenzie. So in the past, council had set a revenue requirement with a tax increase built in, and if the growth came in higher, we still collected the same revenue requirement, so the tax increase was actually lower. What this council communicated prior to this year is that no, we want to look at that again, and if growth comes in higher, we still may wish to maintain the % increase. That did not happen in 2020 because we went down to 0. So we would be revisiting you next year and saying growth is, for example, we've estimated growth at 1.25. If it comes in at 1.5, we come back to council and say, Do you still want to tax over and above that 1.5, or do you want to benefit from that growth and tax lower? So that's always a conversation that council could have at that time. And the dedicated tax increase is all part of that same conversation. So you would assess what's happened with your growth there, and you could apportion a piece of that off to this dedicated increase, or you could say, no, we still want to go ahead with the dedicated increase and enjoy that growth in our revenue because growth also has costs that are attached to it. So it's a conversation we would have with you every spring to clarify what you want to do with that growth piece. And if it comes in lower, we actually have a problem because we have a budget that's based on a higher amount of growth. And so we would have to come back to you with some adjustments to balance that budget. So it's always that
Okay.
unknown piece that we have to bring
Yeah.
to you.
But there is a potential that we could do the base tax where we say, no, we want to benefit from growth, but the dedicated one, we're not going to benefit from growth, or vice versa. Because I think if we're trying to do the dedicated tax streaming to go for our life cycling, I think it would be great to benefit from that extra growth on that aspect. And maybe, so I'm just wanting to clarify whether we can totally do one or the other, or would it have to be both or neither?
You can totally do one or the other. It's your prerogative every time we set a tax rate.
Okay, perfect. And I'll look forward to those numbers. Thanks.
Councillor Roth?
Thank you, Mayor Houston. I'm going to throw my support behind the exact same numbers that were expressed by Councillor Acker, and for two reasons. And one was the exact same reason that he mentioned, but there's another reason in my mind, and that is if the dollars that we raise in revenue between the couple of options that we're talking about are pretty much the same, I would prefer that we send a signal to our administration and a signal to our next council that we support the I'm talking now about the 0.025, because I want to throw my support between the 1% and the 0.025, because 12 months from now, there'll be a new council here, and how many new faces, no one knows, but there will be a new council. And I think it would be easier now for this council to initiate the 0.025 to send a signal to our staff that, number one, the recommendation is sound, and kick it off to the new council so that, and of course, the new council has the ability to change any decisions that this council makes. But I just think that this council is supportive of that. And I think it would be easier now to start it now rather than to start it a year from now. So I'm going to support the 1% and the 0.025. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. It gets it going on the business end, Councillor Roth, in regards to your comments as well. I think the, I think the suggestion that I was making was, the 1% is a tax on the businesses as well, and then the additional 0.25 was another additional tax on the businesses as well. That's kind of why I approached it from a one kind of a one drive, point, but point well taken in regards to getting it going, and I could probably swing that way too. I just thought there would be a larger support to kind of hold off on the business. They both have merit. I mean, they both have merit, and then we can open up open it up to a couple of other colleagues that haven't spoken. So it was just to try to, show a minimized impact to business is what I was trying to approach at that point. But any other comments? Mr. Wolanski.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Ready to go here too. And then Councillor Wilkie.
I just wanted to jump in here, and just because we were going to talk about it a little later, but Ms. Frosta did talk about it yesterday. One of the things that we would do and need to do, regardless of whether it's 0.025, or nothing, and then for the rest of the 6 years that we were going to do it, is come to council with a policy on that tax rate split. And so I'm not saying that helps, or I'm not trying to sway any of the arguments, but further to the comment, if council was comfortable with 0, we would still be doing a policy, this council, on starting that. But the other way works as well. It actually want to have the 0.025 and show it and still have the policy. So just didn't know if that helped, or just wanted to add that context. That's one of the things that we'd be bringing forward with this council anyway, regardless of the number.
Okay, Councillor Stevenson, then Councillor Grilke.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe in baby steps, and I think what this corporate plan has really shown us throughout the last 2 days is that we are starting to lay some really good foundations, that it's a multi-year plan in many facets, not just for this, but in many other areas. And I really do appreciate that we're starting to lay that vision in terms of how to make sure that we are in a really good financial position, not just today, but in the future. And yes, we're going to have those peaks and valleys, and certainly a new council next year can change any direction that we choose. But I'm more and more comfortable with the way we're starting to introduce, how we're introducing this to our residents and to our businesses. And so delaying 1 year, in my mind, isn't the right way to go. I'm really comfortable with that 0.25 idea. It's sort of we're easing them into this idea. And the reason I think that that's a better way for me, and with a 1%, is we have other priorities and other things that we also have to accomplish over the next few years. And to me, 1.5 is a bit steep, just in terms of if we need that room to be able to do other things, which we inevitably will have to do. And that's what I was speaking to yesterday, just in terms of getting our residents used to a small tax increase. If we right away have a dedicated 1.5 over the next 5 years, that actually limits this council for the next year, but also future councils potentially, if they want to choose to follow the policy, which in all likelihood, and hopefully that's what we're setting this this policy up to do, is to be followed. So I think the 1.5 for me is a bit restrictive, just in terms of understanding what else we want to accomplish. So I would rather do almost like we're doing with our other reserves, where we're starting slow and steady, and we're making sure that all the pots are filled and we can build it up. So I'm comfortable with building this pot up at 1%, but also knowing that in future years, we have to also build just the base that we need to operate. So the operating also needs to be built up, and there might be a requirement there for a tax increase, whether it's 1% or 0.5%. I think we need to leave that room. So in my mind, I think I'm aligning with the idea of doing that small introduction of 0.025 with the businesses, and understanding there is a 1% dedicated increase for the next 5 years, hopefully. But then knowing too that if we have to operationally, that we've got that room, that I think that 0.5% actually makes a significant difference for future councils. So that's my comfort level at this time. Thanks.
Okay, excellent points. Councillor Grilke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Philosophically, do we always do a 0.5 gap in the tax rate? Or I know historically we've done 3.9. We've thrown out 1 and 1.5. Can we not be a little bit, can we not reverse engineer it and say, here's what we need to accomplish, or what we agree we need to accomplish this year? And if that looks like 1.17 tax increase and a 0.032 for the split of the business, are we so, we've gone from 1.5 to 1, which is a $200,000 difference from our tax assessment. And I'm not 100% sure what that 0.25 and the 1 look like for business. So I guess if I philosophically agree that I believe that we need to baby step the business tax split in, but I don't know that a 1.5 to a 1 makes the most sense for our tax rate. Am I making sense? up here.
Mr.
Does.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Grocke, I'll make a couple comments and then Ms. Frostad might add to that or correct me. What I would say is, if you recall, even 2% wasn't enough.
Right. Yes.
And so 1.5 to 1, if we, we could say 1.3286481, but, I think for us, it's trying to find a balance, or for council as well, is what's important to start with, and to move forward with, to start the concept. We're not going to be there with 1 or 1.5 even, and so it's what's important is understanding the balance between the two. We would always say the more you can do between the two or in one or whatever is better up front, because you get that compounding impact. And Ms. Frost, I don't know if you want to add anything that I just said, but
You muted. You had it, then you took
The
it off.
question being asked was, what's the difference between the 1 to 1.5 or the 0.05 to 0.025? And the difference in overall revenue is $3 between those two situations. The 0.025 affects only non-residential ratepayers, though, whereas the $200,000 difference is shared by everyone under the tax rate increase.
Right. Okay. So I guess my comments would be, philosophically, I agree that I would prefer to phase in over 7 years the tax split between residential and non-residential. I would prefer not to do the 0 at year 1 and phase it in over 6 years. I would prefer the 7. And I'm open to anywhere between 1 and 1.5 for the tax rate. If we do the phase in of the 0.025, I would prefer, obviously, that we're closer to 1, but I'm not hard, and I don't know that we need to be hard and fast at 1 or 1.1 or 1.2, whatever makes sense. But I agree that we should bring it back closer to 1 if we're phasing in the business split, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Grocke. Just, I think, I think the point that probably is the most convincing point, and I think almost everybody has spoken a little bit to it. I think the one point on going to the 1%, which is what I was leaning to yesterday, and with that other suggestion. However, I totally agree with the idea of that little bit of a starting the process with the business. I've been convinced of that for sure. But I also like the concept of if we had a 1.5 or a 2% annual, I'm going to just use the 1.5 because that's kind of the way we were talking, is that it also affects us when we're starting to do future capital builds and stuff. And if we say that this capital bill is going to cost a certain percentage, plus we have to add 1.5 on top of that, that starts to stretch that tax increase on an annual basis. So I think it makes a lot of sense to keep it at a 1%. I know that a number of councillors have expressed that. I'm supportive of that, because it does do a couple of things, and it does give you a little bit more flexibility, and it doesn't sort of handcuff future capital projects too. So I'm super comfortable with that now myself. And Councillor Oldham, go ahead.
I'm in. I think everyone raised some really good points. Mr. Wolanski said that we need to just get started. And if this council's philosophy, which I understand, is that this split is important, and we've all spoken to that, then we can't say it's important and slough it off to another council in particular, I think. So after hearing everybody's comments, which I super appreciate and respect, lots of great conversation, I see a lot of positives in that model of 1% and then the 0.025 on the split. And I just add that I'm on board for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think the other one is getting them both started with baby steps and not doing too hard on everybody else too as well. And yeah, it was good conversation, everybody. And I think we've kind of given some direction to administration of kind of where we landed, and appreciate the options that were presented. Mr. Wolanski, you guys have thought of everything, and that opens up the floor to some great dialogue with our group. So we're kind of set on those 2 items.
Okay, franchise fees. Just kidding.
I was going to say the same. I thought, no, that's a bad joke.
Mr. Mayor, would it be a good time for a break? And then the next thing would be to come back on, let me see, Boundary Road, I think would be the next one.
Okay.
Would that be a good time to take a break right now and then come back on that one?
I think it would be.
Up to you.
Yeah. What time have we got right now? Let's have a look. 6:20. So we'll see everybody back here at 6:35. Thank you. Call for a short recess. Okay, we're just waiting for one more. And she's back. Hello. Okay, I'd like to call the meeting back to order. Mr. Wolanski, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before actually jumping on to Boundary, I believe Ms. Rostad is ready to go with some of those calculations that council were looking for. So I will turn it to her.
Thank you, Mr. Wolanski. So we have decided to boil down the increases on residential and non-residential to $100,000 of assessment. So we're comparing like for like. So the increase of 1% on a residential property of $100,000 annually is $6.36. That same 1% for non-res is $8.88. So there's your split. Your residents are paying $6.36 and they're paying $8.88. If you choose to add on the 0.025 split change, you would be adding $17 onto that $8.88 in year one. And remember, this is a correction over time of that split inequity that's going on between residential and non-residential.
Any questions from council on that, or any further comments based on that information?
Councillor Ackert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just to clarify, the non-residential, the $17 you spoke of, that's at the end of the 7-year plan. Is that correct? Or is this $17 adding the 0.25?
Mr. Mayor,
Okay.
it would be $17 in year one for 0.25. So last night when we presented the 0.5 split, it was $33.
Per 100,000. Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Councillor McKenzie.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I guess thank you very much, Ms. Frostad, for getting those numbers, and I really value that because it definitely is lower than what I thought it would be. So I myself still believe I really, last night I spoke to it and I really like what administration has offered, and I personally would really like to support just the 1% and sticking with the 0.05% or 0.05 with the business. But I'll be in favor if council wants to lower that. But I personally, I understand that businesses are hurting, but when you truly look at the $33 per 100,000 annual, I don't think it's that big of a hit. And I think it's really important to look at that residential business split and understand that for years our businesses have been paying substantially lower than others in the region. And I think that we need to not kick the can and be a little bit bold and brave and hope that, you know, I think there's other ways that we can continue to support our local businesses and, you know, continue to try to, you know, have our public markets and all those other ways that we can continue to support them, support our downtown by doing the revitalization with the understanding, you know, that we are here to support both residential and business. So thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So that clarified that. I think there's pretty clear direction from council to administration on the proposed rates. 1%,
Okay.
0.25. Thank you.
Okay, so we can, again, we'll just clarify that right at the end and just to make sure, but okay, so Boundary Road. It is a slide 11. It was all on one slide, and we did that purposely so you'd not have to go between slides. So and so open to questions, comments, and I'm sure there might be a multitude of people, but mostly Mr. Lavasser that will be answering your questions on this or comments.
Councillor Ackert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you so much for giving us the options. And it was surprising to me to see there's not much difference when you go from gravel to pavement, and then to understand that it's all throwaway work when we finally need the road to be at that urban standard. So I appreciate seeing it in this context. So thank you so much for all the work you've done. I still think we need to either do that traffic analysis, looking at that area, because there's a lot of angst and issues, I believe, over on that side of town. But I'm happy to hear Stony Plain is looking to partner with us. So if anything, we could share on getting, some engineering or even just working throughout that partnership to accelerate this project before 2031 would be something I'd be very supportive of. But looking at the numbers, it's really hard to justify going the quick goat trail route just to get access when we're just throwing that money away. But if this partnership develops and there's an opportunity to look at front-ending some of this work, I would prefer either option 2 with Stony Plain or option 3A, where we're using that levy funding. We might have to borrow it because we're already in the hole on the developer levies, but I'd hate to do the job twice. So it'll based on demand and need and safety and everything else. And along with the partnership with Stony Plain, I think it's great that we can come to the table and hopefully find some common ground there. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Councillor McKenzie.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. For me, we're in a year where we're trying to cut, and we're talking about staff freezes and that sort of thing. So I really cannot support funding even engineering or design or any other part of this right now, especially when currently this road is recommended for 2031. And especially when we look at our current offsite levy deficit and where we're at with what we have already front-ended for our community. For me, I often talk about areas like Deer Park and Tonewood, where we only have one access into those areas. And I think that when we look around our city, we have other areas where we have connections for similar communities or similar neighborhoods where we've got those limited accesses. When you look at Spruce Ridge, Copperhaven, and Harvest Ridge, right now there is multiple accesses for those areas. Copperhaven, maybe not as much, but when you look at Spruce Ridge, they even have 2 accesses out onto Jennifer Hall. They're through Spruce Ridge Drive. So I do think that currently right now in those areas, it isn't as bad. I know myself, I haven't really heard too many complaints as to it. I know the AM/PM is difficult with the schools and during that time, but again, it's just down in that one corner, and I really don't think this connection would alleviate that as much. I again go to areas like Grove Meadows. For years, it only had the one entrance. It was all the way, and you had to backtrack to head into Edmonton. And when you look at Tonewood, Spruce Ridge, Spruce Village, and again Grove Meadows area, even when we got the Grove Drive connection, until we had that connection to Pioneer Road, those areas had to backtrack a lot to head into Edmonton. And I do believe, through our traffic impact assessments and our traffic master plans, the majority of our traffic stays within Spruce Grove or heads to Edmonton rather than heading the Stony Way. I'm not saying that it's not an important connection, because I do think it is, but I do think that we need to get the proof on the true benefit to Spruce Grove, whether we want to fast track this or not, or do we stick to what we believe that our current studies say. I would like to say, propose, if we could somehow put into the budget, just doing a TIA for that area, or traffic impact assessment, looking at where that is. Mr. Lavasser, I don't know if you can speak to this or not, but I believe a TIA is anywhere from 25 to 60,000, depending on the area that we do. But I'd be in favor of funding that sort of a project, and then therefore moving forward where we go from there. So that's my thoughts on that. I just really can't support putting a lot of money towards this, especially when we're doing what we're doing.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor McKenzie. Mr. Lavasser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There was a bit of study that was brought up by Councillor Acker and Councillor McKenzie. We actually spoke internally about, if we were to do a TIA or traffic impacts assessment, what would we get out of it? And so based on what we perceive we would get out of it, we feel that we can accomplish quite a few things from a smaller scale, sort of continuing to do traffic counts. So we know the current capacity of our current road on Grove Drive. And so as we were looking at it, we contemplated, well, if traffic increased, what would be the project that would come first? And I think that's why, that's sort of why you're seeing the recommended approach and moving Boundary Road a little further out, was because other projects such as Grove Drive twinning to Jennifer Heil would bubble up to the surface in that regard, right? So to me, we may not see the benefit that a TIA would have at this point, but we could add it to our list for traffic monitoring, especially in the AM and PM peaks. And that might give us more value.
Yes, and perfect. And thank you, Mr. Levasseur. And I know, speaking to that, like, yes, your TIA is going to have your traffic counts, and then it just helps to analyze the movements a little bit better and determine. I do trust administration's outcome on just continuing with our own traffic counts. For me, the benefit of at least doing maybe potentially a little bit more, and even the thought of outsourcing it versus just us doing it internally, is to help with our relationship with our regional partners. And, we do have a fair amount of a push from Stony Plain Council, and we know that they believe that it's really important. And, when we look at the school board and with the Catholic school, as well as the public, both the Copperhaven and to the Catholic high school, I do believe that, there is a greater demand coming from Stony, and the benefit of pushing that through is huge for Stony. And well, it is great for us. I just don't believe that it's the top of the priority. I do believe, if we were to do any sort of a study though, and put a little bit of money in there, then at least it shows our regional partners that we do care, we are listening, and we just need to make sure that it makes sense for our residents moving forward. So while I value, what you're saying, and part of me believes that our traffic counts are probably good enough and can speak to that, but it is just nice to show our municipal partners that we're, willing to work with them and listen. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Roth.
Thank you, Mayor Houston. A question to Mr. Levasseur. Am I hearing you say that if we do a traffic impact assessment now for a project that we might not embark upon for a few years, potentially, is that going to give us full value for the money that we spend, or is that somewhat of a throwaway as well? Because traffic patterns will change.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's exactly the point. So a TIA does explore the current state. So what's the traffic patterns like today, and anticipates growth. So it has that future focused look as well. But if you're looking too far into the future, that's where it would become a little bit gray as to the value of it. But understanding, some of the points that were made here today, we could serve this discussion tonight or this evening as a basis to some administrative discussions with Stony Plain.
Okay, thank you for that. Hearing that, then my preference would be not to put any money towards Boundary Road this year, meaning 2021, and not even doing the traffic impact assessment, because I think our assumptions are likely to be maybe close, but likely to be non-exact. And so I would rather do the study at some point in the future for a project that we won't embark upon, which is my preference, that we don't embark upon it for a few years. And I don't think this is something we should be doing next year, given our financial situation, our financial circumstances, which are, I'm not sure if the word dire is appropriate, but not the strongest financial circumstances anyway. So I prefer to put off any expenditures on Boundary Road for some point after 2021. Thank you.
Councillor Stevenson, then Councillor Grilke.
Great, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm not a traffic engineer by any stretch of the imagination. But I do follow a lot of experts when it comes to traffic and making your city walkable and making it work for not just cars, but for bicycle, like people who cycle, people who walk. And it's interesting because they often tell you like the solution to a traffic problem is just build another road. And they can show you that actually that isn't the solution at all, right? And we have this preconceived notion in our minds that our part of town is the worst. Like when I commuted into Edmonton, it would sometimes take me 5 lights to get past Greystone onto Century Road North to go to work because of all the traffic backups, right? And you would think, oh my gosh, like this is ridiculous. But you realize that everybody is probably in that position because we are a very car-centric society. COVID, I think, has shown us that we have to rethink that a little bit. And there's a few people probably in my situation where I'm no longer commuting. So our traffic patterns have probably changed, maybe not a lot, but a little, and they might change in the future. So it can be a preconceived notion in your own head that your situation is really bad, that there is a traffic problem, when in fact, that is just the way it is, right? And we see that even with the parking study with the city center where people think we have a parking issue, when in fact we don't. We might have a peak where it might be a little difficult to find parking right in front of the business that you wish to enter. However, if you take a little bit of a step back and look at the fuller picture, you realize there isn't a parking problem. And we don't probably have an issue right now with traffic in that area. As Councillor McKenzie said, who benefits from this? If you are living in that area, are you taking Boundary to get out? You're probably taking it to get out if you're going west. But the vast majority of us either work in Spruce Grove or in Edmonton. You are going east. Those are your 2 fastest ways to get there. And when we look at commute times, how much time are you actually shaving off? Let's say we did build that road and we spent all the money to build that road up. How much money are you actually saving if we build that road up compared to a normal traffic pattern? So that's where I think we have to weigh the pros and cons. If I'm shaving 30 seconds off your commute, was it worth all that money to be able to do that? When in a dozen years, maybe our goal should be that we don't have to build up more roads, but that we want more businesses in Spruce Grove so that your commute isn't onto the highways, your commute is into the city. So I think there's a lot of things we have to take into consideration. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm okay with not pursuing anything at this point because I'm not convinced that it's actually needed at this point. And people have given other reasons that I absolutely agree with at this point. And as we continue to have these discussions, because this discussion won't go away, but I think we also have to talk about what we want to do as a city and what we hope to grow and do and develop, and not just think that everything is going to be the way it was. We're not going to see the traffic patterns the way they were. We fundamentally changed. And so I think leaving this for now, we have a number of other priorities that you laid out beautifully yesterday, just in terms of what needs to be done next, in terms of not just traffic flow, but we've also talked about what we would like to do to connect a trail to Stoney and Spruce Grove. So I think there's a number of other initiatives that I think that when we think about like how we want to develop our city and how we want to move our city, there's other places that I think we're better off spending that money right now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Grilke.
Oops. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I fully appreciate all of my councillors' comments, and I'm on the same kind of wavelength. I fully respect that it's frustrating to be at Copperhaven and be able to see the church and to see Boundary Road and have no access to it. I completely understand that that's frustrating, and it should be just simple just to punch that road through. But as Councillor Acker mentioned, when you see the cost of $4.1 million to do it, to have it be supported by developer assessment in the future, that's a heck of a lot of money to give access to primarily residents from without our community, from not within our community. I feel like I've lived on Range Road 32, and I can attest that I've been to Wabamun 10 times, and it was 10 minutes away from my house. But I've been to Spruce Grove and Stony Plain countless times. For whatever reason, the natural progression of traffic is east in our community as opposed to west, and I don't know how to explain it. It's just kind of it goes to where the businesses are, and I feel like some of my other councillors have mentioned the necessity for it currently I don't believe has been expressed fully to me, that I would consider leapfrogging it over other things that would take a higher priority in our community. I think the development of it will happen organically. I'm not saying it will never happen. I think it will happen organically as business develops and as we develop our residential towards Boundary Road. I am always interested in keeping the conversation open with Stony Plain. I don't not want to close the door on it, but I'm not willing to commit any money at this time for it. So we can have philosophical discussions and good-natured conversation, but at this time it's not a priority for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Oldham.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll echo much of what my past, more recent colleagues spoke to. Councillor Roth talked about, doing a traffic impact assessment now for a road that we're likely not building for a few years. And then Councillor Stevenson talked about the impacts of COVID. And I think about those two concepts combined. And I think if we did a traffic impact analysis in the short term, it may or may not be a true reflection of what traffic impact assessment is going to be in the long term. Some people are going to stay working from home. Some people are going to be going back to the workplace and commuting again. But a traffic impact assessment now, although I do always want to extend a connection with our neighbors in Stony Plain, I don't think it's practical, because I don't know what information we are going to be able to glean from that we can extrapolate to X number of years from now. On the point of X numbers of years from now, I think these discussions are great to have within communities. I'm grateful we had this discussion with Stony Plain. I think, though, that we need to have them a couple years out so we can plan and share with our various departments in the city that this is a project that we'd like to consider bumping ahead of 2031. To be honest, I didn't even know it was in the 2031 plan. So it's really good to know that now. And I'm certainly open, as Councillor Grillke said, to keep that conversation going. And maybe we recommend to administration that it gets bumped up to whatever, pick a year, 2024, 2023, 2027. That conversation is a great one to have. I just don't want to get too far ahead of the game in the leapfrogging and advance too quickly. So like others have said, I don't think it's the best time now, but I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have. As Mr. Lavaseur mentioned, I think the traffic counts are probably the best way to go. We just spent 45 minutes nickel and diming back and forth between 0.2s and 0.3s, and I don't want to go and spend $25,000 to $60,000, as I think Councillor McKenzie may have referenced, that's the cost of business. I get that, but if there's not going to be the right timing for it, I'd be hesitant to go and spend the TIA money. But I think if we can continue to do traffic counts, administration knows that we may want to look at this a little bit earlier than what is currently scheduled and keep the conversation going with Stony Plain. I'd be supportive of that approach. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Oldham. I think everybody's pretty much spoke to it. I think the best part about the discussion itself is the comment that we got from Stony Plain, that they're actually willing to come to the table and talk to us about it, because they haven't for 12 to 14 years. This goes back a long way when we initially had the discussion. This goes back to the David Hales days when we said, come on, Stony, let's sit and talk about this road. You know what they said? Not interested, not a priority, not a priority. And I know that, the enthusiasm of, looking to do a connection through our communities. And, I think the other one has to come down to this council or the next council having a philosophical discussion on the willingness to share a portion of their road, of that other portion of that road as well. When I crunch the numbers, when we look at our 4.1 million, and I agree too, if we're going to do it, we do it right. There's no point in building a throwaway $1.6 million throwaway road only to have it torn up. So if we ever, whenever we build roads, I think we should build them to the highest standard. So I agree with that. But the fact of the $4.1 million for the punch through, I was kind of surprised that number was that high. I was expecting it to be around 2.5 or whatever, but I think we had a little bit of different numbers before. However, when you look at the 4.1 for that section, with the overall project being 11 million, that would mean the Stony Plain portion of that section would be 6.9 million. So that would be the cost, almost $7 million almost for that portion, which we would be looking at, potentially sharing. So that bumps the number up to us to be around $7.7 million altogether for that project if we were to partner with them. So, but, I just want to say, hearing from everybody, and the conversation we've had, and I had with the mayor last night from Stony Plain after we talked to him, is that I think we still need to talk to them. We can, plan to continue the conversation in 2021 and and as some of you have indicated, have a closer look at a strategy to, to do this project at some point, and look at, continuing the conversation with them and appreciate it. Like, I want to make sure that we're seen as, that we're not, I think we need to be seen as, very working together, cooperative with them. And I think we've demonstrated that by even having the conversation to begin with. But at any rate, thank you very much for the comments. And we are going to, I think there's a little bit of back and forth that's going to happen with administration right now. I think that's already happening. That created some conversation with the GMs as well as our city managers in regards to, the potentials and the financial challenges that we're facing, as well as Stony. Like Stony's facing some pretty tough challenges as well. So, and we respect that. So thank you very much for the conversations, and we'll go forward with some further dialogue with Stony in 2021, and look forward to sharing the enthusiasm for building our communities together. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. So I think next is to bring up slide 14. Ms. Chan can do that. And this is kind of what we can talk about looking forward or looking ahead. Before I just, talk about some of the rest of the steps on this slide. We had the 3 kind of committee direction, or 4, kind of, a couple of them were tied together there, but just confirming again that council is supportive of the high load corridor study being done, and that I think we've heard a general consensus on the 1%, and then on the second piece, the split rate as the 0.025, and then nothing on Boundary Road. That's, I think, where we landed on this evening, and that's what we would then reflect in the budget coming forward. Just want to give one last chance if there's any comments or questions on that.
Councillor Grilke.
Just a quick question, Mr. Wolanski, how much was the most funding again?
3.671 million, roughly.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Grilke. That is correct. We did allocate a significant portion of it. There was a little bit remaining that we would then, and Ms. Frostad could clarify, that we're going to allocate towards our surplus this year. It's one time, so it's not cumulative. So yeah, so that's where the 15,000 would come from.
Because I recall you saying that without that funding, we wouldn't have had a balanced budget. And correct. So looking forward, I guess that's a conversation for future councils. We'll deal with 2021, but I'm thankful that we received it, because tonight would have been a completely different, or the last 3 nights would have been completely different conversations. But okay, I may have more questions later. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Councillor Grilke, and recognizing what you just said about the most funding. I don't know anything that could have been more timely for us, and the importance of that. I think it reflected on some of the costs that we had to recover, that we have to cover off on, the Spritz Ridge Gardens area as well, and where that is coming out of a provincial grant rather than the general tax base. And at the end of the day, we at least had the opportunity, to cover that off with some of that funding. And, I have to say to our provincial and federal governments, and thank them for that. And to, if Councillor Turton, if MLA Turton is listening this evening, I just want to say a thank you to them, because that has helped us get over the hurdle this year, and appreciate that. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. That actually goes into some of this information that we have here on the slide, in terms of looking ahead. We do know that there'll be a provincial budget, and we have heard some rather ominous things coming out in regards to that. And so there's possible impacts to MSI and just in general. So we'll be certainly monitoring that and looking at that, as I'm sure our citizens and council will as well. We did, of course, we talk about that this is a great start in many of these kind of conversations that we've had in some of these areas, but also recognizing the balance in terms of what the economic conditions that our community is facing, businesses and residents. We will, we don't want to, we look at it as future challenges, but also future opportunities as well, in terms of our growth and how that may be impacted. Again, we just talked about the most funding that's not going to be there in all likelihood again. And so there are going to be further things that will be required to kind of look at and have some good conversations about again. Spring adjustment, as we know, and Ms. Frost had talked about that earlier today, about how that gives us an opportunity to pivot, reevaluate, depending on growth, depends on a couple of things that may come in if needed. So that is something that we did last year, and we can continue to move forward, because it gives us that opportunity if we need it. Again, on a couple of these things that we've talked about, including the reserve setup for life cycling and tax split rate shift will require policies. So those will be developed and come to council for consideration and approval. And one other thing we did hear and wanted to say, looking ahead, that we heard a little bit more about the debt policy discussion. Limits related to what the municipality has in terms of our own policy, but then also having a different and maybe more enhanced conversation, as council had identified over the last couple of days, related to, is our policies different for when we look at municipal utility and developer streams and all those different things. So we heard that as something that we will come back with and have some further policy, strategic, philosophical discussions on that. So for this evening and for these last couple of days, that sort of wraps up from administration. I want to make sure that again we've answered and council feels comfortable with everything that we have provided this far. And if there's anything else, we're certainly open to answering questions. I do want to take this time to thank, and before Mr. Mayor, I certainly return it back to you to finish the evening, or for council to ask questions. But I do want to thank my administrative team for all their hard work. I can't tell you enough about how many extra meetings we've had with this format, how we've kind of tried to work through this and pivot, not only because of some of the opportunities and challenges, but also just because we're trying to present it in a different way. And so we thank you, council, as well, for your patience, because it hasn't always been perfect, even behind the scenes and even over the last couple of days. But I'm really grateful for all of them, and I get to kind of stand in front of you and present this, but it's really them that prop me up. And lastly, I'll just say that I want to thank council for your input, your feedback, your questions, your patience. It's been, we've been talking about it over the last couple of days, and even when we had the committee of the whole discussions, and even over the last several months, and how it has provided us with great direction, opportunity to really question and look at things ourselves. So I would throw out there that there's been great leadership on both council and administrative side in looking at these challenges, but also opportunities. And I think a couple of councillors have said this is a great opportunity for us to pivot, shift, and really set the framework for sustainability moving forward. So thank you to both administration and council in that regard. And if there's any questions, we'll certainly answer them. But if not, we'll turn it back to you, Mr. Mayor, to wrap up. And I think we got what we needed, and we're prepared for November 23rd for council's consideration and actual approval.
Okay, great, Mr. Lansky, thank you. And I'll just open up the floor to my colleagues and council. If you have any closing remarks in regards to, potentially how you felt about the budget this year, about the direction we're taking, Councillor Stevenson, and now I've got Councillor Grilke, and take the opportunity to share some thoughts, and then Councillor Roth. Councillor Stevenson is first, and then Councillor Grilke.
Great, thank you, Mayor. So first and foremost, thank you to Mr. Wolanski. It can't be easy to be thrown into the interim CAO position yet again and lead your team and really guide this council through this process in one heck of a year. This is, I don't want to use the word unprecedented because it's been overused, but it is unprecedented. I don't know if any other council in the last 100 years has had to deal with pandemic. So I do want to thank you for leading us. I really felt, obviously this is only my 4th time dealing with this, 3.5, because the first time you're just like, okay, whatever. But I really felt very comfortable, and it could be maybe because some of the knowledge that we're getting, but I really felt we're starting to refine what this council in particular has been looking for from the administration. So I just want to say kudos to you, Mr. Wolanski, for leading that team, and obviously to the rest of administration. You didn't let us down, and you don't let us down. And I think that's really important for our residents to understand, that we really do rely on people who live and breathe this. We are, other than the mayor, we are part-time councillors, though that's debatable on some days. But, we have other jobs, so we are not immersed in this day in and day out. And so sometimes it's hard to pivot. So we really do rely on the experts in the room. And I just want to say thank you so much for providing this guidance, and also giving us that room to debate and provide that direction and what we would like to see based on what we understand our residents to want. It's knowing that there's that flexibility and you're going to make it work. And you've shown that you could do that with the pandemic earlier this year. But certainly the way you presented, I think you've given us a lot of options, and we had really good debate. And like, to my fellow colleagues, my God, I learned a lot from you over the last 3 days. I think a lot of you made some amazing points where I thought for sure I was going one direction, and then I'd hear 2 of you speak. I'm like, well, now I'm the other way. So, and I think that's good. I think it really shows growth, and that we're open to listening and hearing each other and really coming to that consensus. So I just want to say thank you to all of my colleagues for being such amazing contributors, and I learned so much from all of you. And I just really respect the dialogue, even when we can see that maybe we're not necessarily on the same page with the same argument. I think we're coming together to say overall, I think we're all on the same page, and I'm just really, really happy to see that as we go out of 2020, God willing, we leave this year behind us, that we're putting ourselves in a really good position of strength. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of you. I actually really enjoyed these last 3 days debating and putting our city on a really good foot forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Stevenson, for the remarks. And I think you're correct when you reflect on the comfort level you have, because I don't know if you recall when you were first elected, I did mention it takes a full term to learn how to be a councillor, and then after you've completed, when you get into your end of your first term and into your second term, that's when you really start, having that, complete understanding of an overall picture. But I think you nailed it. Okay, I think it was Councillor Grilke was next, and then Councillor Roth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to probably reiterate a lot of what Councillor Stevenson said. I feel like this year was a much more holistic discussion, and I appreciate you and your team, Mr. Wolanski, kind of hearing what we've said over the last few years and presenting this budget in a way that is, it flowed and it was easy to understand, and it was a lot more verbiage and storytelling than it was about, you know, finite numbers. And for somebody that spreadsheets do not fill my soul and budgets do not feed my well-being, I appreciate the first part of this budget more than any other than we've had. So thank you so much for hearing that and making it into fruition. I think we'll tweak it over the years, and hopefully future councils will get the benefit of that. So I just have to say, and I said it the other night too, the responsiveness of you and your team over the last 3 nights, if there was a question, being able to answer it right away. I'm sure there's people, you know, sitting with their phones in their hands, texting you all back and forth. I could hear some of your administrator phones going off when you were speaking, and I'm sure they're just getting feedback from everybody that supports them. So please send my regards and my thanks to all of your team. And as interim, we certainly appreciate the level of work. You had said, thank you for your patience. And I feel like I said that 3 years ago. Thank you for your patience, because, you know, it was a different time coming into it for the first time. So patience is always granted and it's reciprocated. So wonderful job, and thank you again.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Wilkie. And I think I got a note from somebody that said they don't want this evening to end. I don't know what that means. We're having so much fun this last couple of days. Councillor Roth, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Houston. And when you said that it takes a full 4 years to become acquainted with the job, I hope you weren't saying that those of us who started with 3-year terms ended our first term without being fully acquainted with the job. I hope that's not what you're saying at all. And, the mayor and I had a brief telephone conversation this afternoon, and I think Mr. Wolanski, your name did come up, and it was expressed in a very positive way, because your staff have all been through this before on previous budgets, but this is your first go as a CAO with the interim tag, of course. But I'm really impressed with the way that you and your staff have handled this budget. It was said a moment ago that the term unprecedented is maybe a trite term, an overused term, and therefore maybe loses some of its meaning. However, I think these are unprecedented times. And for a while there, when I look forward to these potentially 3 nights of budget discussions, I was thinking, oh yeah, there aren't maybe too many big decisions to be made, so maybe it'll go a little bit more quickly than usual, but it hasn't. And the reason it hasn't is because your decisions may become more difficult during difficult times than they are when times are better. Just a little bit of an anecdote to express a point of view that I don't think any of us on council really fully understands the amount of work that goes into a budget. And I remember years ago when it was in the summer, I do remember that, where I was coming into City Hall. You all remember those days when we actually could get into City Hall, right? Coming into City Hall using the north stairs. And it was probably about, I think it was around 8 o'clock in the evening, so close to the time it is now. And I ran into somebody who was coming down the stairs, leaving the building as I was going up. And it was late summer. And I asked the person, why are you working so late? And she said, well, we're getting ready for the budget. We're getting into the nitty gritty on the budget, and lots of people are putting in extra hours. And I think that's par for the course when you have a staff who are as dedicated as ours are, and they put a lot of time in. And so if you would take this council's, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn by telling you that this council appreciates it. And those staff who are on this call now, in this meeting now, they will be hearing these comments. But Mr. Wolanski, if you don't mind taking council's thanks and accolades back to all staff who had input into the budget, because there are more staff who are here tonight who had input into the budget who are not on this in this meeting. So I hope that you'll take our thanks back to everyone who was involved. Oh, I just want to say one thing. I was going to preface with this, that I didn't know if I should say anything, because we will have another opportunity and a better opportunity on November 23rd. And that's the meeting when these kinds of comments typically are given out. So you may hear a lot of these things repeated, not just from me perhaps, but potentially from everyone. So thank you.
We won't mind that.
Okay. especially the good things. They're all good.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Roth. And the one thing that I missed from Councillor Roth, he would have normally said this is his 26th budget, which I reminded him about. And that's a lot of budgets to go through, Councillor.
I'm saving that for the 23rd. I have to hold something back.
Okay.
And you may remember that for years, I did do a calculation of the number of, it was very rough, but the number of hours cumulative of everybody on council spent doing budget reading and study and conversation and debate. That number will probably be a little lower if I use it this year than it was in previous years, because we have less experience. But I do appreciate this, council. You're all awesome, and I learned a great deal from all of you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Councillor. Councillor McKenzie.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, through you to administration, I just echo the sentiments from the colleagues that have spoken before. One of the things that I just wanted to say, though, for me is I know I have been a big pusher, and I think it was last year I was told to, we've heard you. And I love the breakdown of the capital and the operating, and I look forward to even getting that broken down a little bit better. And I'm really excited about that. But I also wanted to say, I think it was last year or the year before, during one of our strategic planning sessions, we had one of our consultants tell us that we may have to be a bold council and we have to stop kicking the can down the road. And this budget has amazed me, because I think that while we are in really hard times, we have also been able to stop kicking the can. And even though we're looking at some of our cuts, I think this budget and this administration, what you guys have brought forward to us, still allows us to have a huge light on the future, still allows us to focus on growth, still allows us to be positive while offering those cuts and looking at how can we slow maybe in certain areas and that sort of thing. And I think for me, that's the biggest thing, because I think it has shown how administration and council has reacted to the current times, as well as continued to stay on track with making sure that we're looking to the future, we're taking care of our community, we're being sustainable, and we're not kicking the can anymore, and we're taking control and making sure that, we're not losing that growth capture that over the past years we've lost. And I look forward to spring budget adjustment, just another new change that this council has also brought forward. And it's been a really great year. So thank you again to administration. And Mr. Wolanski, without I don't want to swell your head too much. There also was a guy here who's been here for a few months that isn't here. So, a bit of a shout out to our old CAO, but in the same breath, what I've seen in the last 3 days is we're going to be okay moving forward with whoever we bring on. And a great leader is only as good as their team, and your administration, everybody on board at the City of Spruce Grove, top notch. And I am really proud to be a councillor with this administration. And I know often you hear from us because we hear the complaints from others, whether it's developers, whether it's the residents. But at the end of the day, we have a very strong administration and workforce at the City of Spruce Grove. And, I also, speaking to people that work for the city, they're proud to work here as well. And I think we treat them as well. And I know it's been tough times too, with having to lay off a few people, not bring on those. But again, I think it's just been such a positive time. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Councillor McKenzie. And you know what? The best thing I like about Councillor McKenzie, she speaks from the heart. And I know that, you know what? Yeah, you're emotional. That's a good trait. And you get me a little bit too with your conversation sometime, but we certainly appreciate, your passion on council. Councillor Oldham. Then Councillor Acker. I don't know who had his hand up.
Either way works for me. Thanks, Mayor. I would just add a few specific things, and thanks to my colleagues for lots of great comments. Things that were evident to me over these last 3 days were leadership and teamwork. And Mr. Wolanski kind of leads the administrative discussion, and Mrs. Bourget and Mrs. Frostad and Mr. Levasseur, are a huge part of that. And then there's a huge team underneath that. And the communication, the responsiveness. Mrs. Frostad took a call for me on Tuesday morning trying to figure some things out. The willingness to, as other people have said, pivot and work together. It's been an impressive display of leadership and teamwork from our administration. And I know that it works throughout the organization. So that's really stood out to me. And I would also thank my colleagues for that, because I think as we go through challenging discussions, there's a lot of things to figure out, and we all are here for the right reasons. I'm proud to work with you. And I think although we don't see things all the way the same times, we shouldn't. We're representing a whole community of 37,000 people, but I really respect each of you for how you go about what you do. And I'm grateful to have shared these last 3 years and 3 days with you. And then the other thing I want to comment on is that the process was sound. And when the process is sound, as has been tweaked over the years, to maybe, and not only by council, but by administration, how this is presented and the approach that we're taking has changed. And when the process is sound, oftentimes the results will come because of the process. Results just don't happen out of thin air. They have to be through a sound process and through tweaking and relooking at things. And that's not an easy process to undertake for a long time. And I think we've all stuck to that idea, and we got it as well tonight as we've got it in the last 3 years. And I really appreciate the concept that we're going to keep tweaking it and keep moving forward and trying to get better, because that will serve our community. So it's been a great few days, and I want to thank everyone for their participation and making it that way. Thanks, Mayor.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I would just add too that, one thing that when you're speaking, when several are speaking, it doesn't end here too, right? I mean, so when we talk about our team, and then on the 23rd, this is Hetherington's team then takes over, and we've heard a lot about the messaging, and they've already been working hard and getting that planned, and then it shifts to getting that communication out, and so it doesn't stop, right? And it's ongoing, and we'll just continue to provide that support to the community and council and getting the message out too. So it doesn't end today or the 23rd.
Okay, thank you very much. And Councillor Acker?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, there's not much more to say. Everyone said it so well, but I have to say this has been probably the best budget process I've gone through, and I've only done, I think, 7, not in comparison to Councillor Roth, because it got us thinking strategically and taking us a little bit higher than just the line items. And I'm the opposite of Councillor Grolke. I love the spreadsheets. I love the data. I love the numbers. But I find sometimes we get stuck at those numbers and we aren't looking at the bigger picture. And I've enjoyed the last 3 days here, looking at that big picture and being focused on what's best for our community. And that's why we're all here. And Ms. Wolanski, to you and to all our administration and everyone that's worked on here, I guess it can't go understated how easy you made it for us by all the decisions you've made throughout 2020 to protect the taxpayer, protect our community and our businesses from a really, really difficult budget, which I was expecting to come into. So all the work that you've done on trimming the cost of prioritizing projects, deferring where we can, looking internally, looking at efficiencies, all of those that the organization combined has looked at, has really made it a way more positive experience at this budget. Because quite frankly, when we were sitting in the middle of summer and we were looking at the economy and we were seeing the impacts throughout the world, I was fearful of coming into this budget. And when I opened up the package, and as we've gone through the 3 days, we've got away from all those day-to-day because we have the trust and faith that our administration has that covered. So now we can look at that strategic direction of where we need to go. So thank you so much. It's so important for this council and for our community to have that trust and faith in our administration that you've done the hard work for us. And we're just now tweaking it before presenting it to our residents. But I really appreciate it. And this has been a great process. I felt that every question I've had throughout the last 3 days, whether it's instantly or the next day, administration has had an answer, and a great answer. Has completely responded to any requests I've had, and I've heard others from my colleagues that have been answered. So thank you so much, and pass that along to everyone for their hard work and research. It's been a great process. I love the way we're going with this. I agree with Councillor McKenzie. The capital operating split I think is important. And as is mentioned, and you've already taken that pointers, a little more detail on the business cases I think will go a long way. But I think we're on the right path. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And Ms. Wolanski, I think you've heard a lot of positives from council, reflective of our team and working together. I look back on, and I'm very connected in the region. I hear a lot of horror stories from a lot of different councils and some of the challenges that other mayors face. And I'm really fortunate this term to work with the team I'm working with, and we had some newbies come on that turned out pretty darn good, I would say overall. Pretty pleased with that, and I bounce a lot of stuff off all of them, and we get a lot of feedback. I'm going to say this is my 13th year as the mayor of Spruce Grove. This has been my most challenging year, reflecting on the challenges that we've had as a community and our businesses and everybody that's had those challenges. And I don't know if lucky number 13 is a lucky number, but I felt a lot of pressure this year from a lot of things, and particularly the health and safety of the community. But I think with our administration and stuff, man, we responded to cutting things, and sometimes the message didn't get out how much we did, but we did a heck of a lot. We zeroed taxes, we cut budgets, we unfortunately had to lay some staff off, but we always managed to move forward. The one thing, you'll notice, Councillor Roth will notice this, this council we have longer council meetings. Why? Because we're engaged, we're inquisitive, we need detail. And I think Mr. Wolanski has said to me many times over the last couple of months when we've been working closely together is that the most important thing for me, Mr. Mayor, from administration's perspective, is getting you the right information to make the decisions that you need to make. I'm not pushing in either direction. I'm going to let council. That's a council governance decision, and that's what he didn't support. And I wanted to say thank you, Mr. Wolanski, for the relationship we've had working together through this next process. But I think looking, super appreciative of that as well. I think the one thing I have to say, and I've told my wife this many times, the best part about this term, our council will come around and make the best decision. It's not a lot of pressure on me because I know we'll get to the right decision on a lot of things. And we just showed that in this budget about how to approach it with our very moderate tax increases, respecting the business and everything this year. And we'll get that message out, but certainly appreciative. And also from council's perspective, and I want everybody on our administration to hear that, a council is only good as the team below it. Council is only as good as the administration. If you have strong administration with strong leadership and then strong staff working in the fields. I stop and talk to a lot of staff out there on a daily basis. They're doing a fantastic job for us. And let's keep telling them that and keep working together on the positives. But thanks again, Mr. Wolanski, to everybody. I think I've pretty much thanked everybody, but I just have to tell you, based on where we've been and where we want to go, and Jeff talked a little bit about the strategic direction, but I just want to let you know that how proud I am to be the mayor of this city. It's a real honor, and to work with this many great people. I mean, we can't go wrong if we just stay this course. Anyway, thanks to everybody, and we'll close it at that. I know that a lot of you want to stay longer. But Mr. Wolanski, thanks again for this. Hey, the other one I wanted to mention, I actually wrote it down to say. I want to say that this time going on the go around, administration really listened to council. The next day things changed, and the next day you got that stuff, and we got more data, and we did things. So thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to some of the direction and stuff. And I think And I'm also proud that I think we've given clear direction to administration, and we'll bring that to our budget discussions. And, we'll move forward as a city. Thank you. I've said enough. All right, I think that concludes. So with that, Mr. Wolanski, is that it? Is there anything else that you need to say, or anything else you need to add going forward? We have a council meeting on November 9th, and the actual budget presentation will be coming to us on the 23rd, I believe.
That's the intent. Yep. No, Mr. Mayor, I'd let you finish with those great words, and I do believe you probably need a motion though to adjourn the meeting, but that's the only thing I think will be left on the table.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Councillor Stevenson.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Good night. Have a great evening, and thank